Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Talking Niagara this evening. No, not Talking Niagara. It's been legal this evening.
Oh,
Um,
Peter, what have you been doing? Did you have enough coffee today?
Dave will be happy that I'm advertising Talking Niagara. Yeah, watch
Yeah.
Talking Niagara 7 a.m. on Talking Niagara tomorrow morning. But watch Spin Legal on Facebook, LinkedIn, and and YouTube
Yes,
tonight,
YouTube. Yeah.
6:15 p.m. It is great to have you on board. And well, if you need to contact us, you can do so at Invictus Legal LLP, and you can do so on 905-688-5598. Email Angela at angela@weareinvictus.legal, or me at peter@weareinvictus.legal. And remember, check out our website. It's weareinvictus.legal. And we will love to to have you on board and listen to any comments that you might have, or actually just come along, come along and enjoy yourself on a regular basis.
Yeah. And feel free to share your videos and invite other friends to watch them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so one of the things we're talking about today is, well, I guess it's because we had an election last week, and well, we had a new government, or was it an old government, or was it a new old government, or an old new government? No, I don't know. But the combination.
Whatever. Seems
Yeah.
like Canada likes to switch its socks all the time, but
But
different colors.
again, the interesting thing is, did you know that Australia had a new government as well? Eight,
Hmm.
6 days after we had a new government, Australia's got a new government.
Yeah, they elected it similar way.
Yeah,
And they had the opposition leader in Australia who lost their own seat and they resigned.
yeah, he
We had
resigned.
an opposition leader in our government who did not get reelected in his own seat, but he did not resign.
Well, yeah, but again, Angela, you and I are not members of the Federal Conservative Party, so hey, it's up to the Federal Conservatives to decide what to do next, right?
Yeah, but it won't become a member until they start making sense and reaching out to more Canadians.
Yeah, all right. Okay, so today's really about, we talked about charter rights, a few particular things on charter rights, how they impact court decisions, and how they might interpret charter rights, because court decisions actually dating back from 1089, the the courts basically have tried to reintroduce what they call common laws, and those common laws have all been introduced by judges traveling around Britain initially, in figuring out what the laws were, what the common elements of the law were, and creating that. But now today, court decisions interpret both charter rights in Canada and statutes in Canada and original common law in Britain, from Britain.
And laws can now be challenged under the charter if someone thinks that a law was passed that doesn't pass charter muster in people's opinions, so they
And
can
we'll
actually
get to that.
push
We'll
back.
get to that during the course
Yeah,
of this discussion.
yeah.
But yeah, that's actually an interesting thing, because I'd always thought about that. It's like you hear a law and you kind of go, well, why doesn't it's like you seem to hear a law, and they kind of go, the government enacted the new carrot law, for example, just to be stupid, right? Why doesn't every carrot eater protest about the new carrot law? Because it's in their worst interests, because carrots, everybody knows that carrots are good for you.
Hmm.
Right. So therefore, we should have, we need to make changes to the government's new carrot law, and it's it's draconian, etc., etc., etc. You know where I've been, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So I'm surprised that not many more people don't jump up and down about interpreting their the charter rights in that regard.
Oh yeah, this is one of the things. Like charter rights, they cover everything. There's different types of freedoms, and they're separated under the charter under many different ways. Like you have your fundamental freedoms, which is like your freedom of conscience and religion, freedom
Yeah.
of thought, belief, expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. Like I
What do
can
you mean?
associate with Peter anytime I want. Like nobody can tell me that I can't associate with Peter.
What
Right?
do you mean? What do you mean, peaceful assembly? Get out of my way! I'm using my fist to get you out of my way.
Yep. And then there's democratic rights, where you have the rights of citizens to vote in elections, to elect members of the House of Commons or Legislative Assembly, or even to run for office.
Oh, but again, hey Angela, there's nothing in there that says you've got to vote Conservative. I'm disappointed by that. Surely everybody knows you've got to vote Conservative.
No, you can vote communist if you want. Right?
I'm picking holes in it deliberately, as you well know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I'm just throwing these ones in there.
Yeah.
Right?
And then there's mobility rights, where
Yeah.
you have a right to move, and gain a right to pursue the gaining of a livelihood in any province. Like if somebody's not happy in Ontario and wants to move and work at the gas plants in Alberta, they could.
But
Nobody's
okay,
stopping
so
them.
here's an interesting one about that, right to move and gain liability. So if I'm trucking produce from one province to another, and provincial tariffs get in the way, surely that's a breach of the right to move and gain livelihood.
To some extent, yeah. So this is why there's a lot of talk about interprovincial trade,
Mm,
where Mark Carney's always standing up and saying, we don't want 13 economies, we want one.
yeah.
So they want to make sure everything is the same across Canada. So that's one of the things that's being worked on. Hey, traditionally this was kind of set up to protect some provinces where they have certain industries in some provinces, so that
Oh,
parts of the other parts of the industry don't take it over. And this also allows any affirmative action programs where if somebody in a province is belonging to a socially economic group that and or there's where there's a below the rate of the average level of employment, that there could be charter rights that could be used to
oh,
ameliorate that. Like you can
okay.
have,
So you're kind of saying, well, hey, we need to protect employment for Yukon gold miners, right?
yep, or you need to protect it for I don't know, blonde-haired, blue-eyed men who I don't know. Especially if they're all unemployed.
Yeah, but again, I think not
Yeah,
with
yeah.
both of those,
Generally, they
right?
look at traditionally
Yeah,
disadvantaged groups.
yeah.
And legal rights is you have the right to life, liberty, and security of person, right? Not to be deprived thereof,
Don't
except
put me in prison. I'm pleading with you. Don't put me in prison.
yep. And everybody has a right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure. Like I can't walk into the office and tell everybody that I'm going to be searching their person.
But
Everybody
why
has a
not?
right not to be arbitrarily detained or in prison. They can't just throw you in things, even though we have a
Oh,
jail
why
in our
not?
we have a
Why
jail in
not?
our office. So
We got some bad dudes we need to get rid of. We need that.
yeah. And then there's arrest or detention. We have the right to, upon arrest, to be informed promptly of the reasons for your arrest, and the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay, and to be informed of that right, and to have the validity of the detention determined by way of habeas corpus, and to be released if the detention is not lawful. So, in other words, you have a right to have reasonable bail.
Yeah.
There's a number of rights here they have in terms of that you're basically not guilty until you're proven guilty, okay? And that you have a right not to incriminate yourself in a criminal proceeding. And you also have a right not to have unusual or cruel treatment or punishment if you are found guilty. Like they can't put you to be drawn and quartered, and they can't put you to be pilloried in town square, or they can't be given to paddle out to people.
And I'm going to I'm going to put an official amendment up in the next Parliament that we need to change section 16.1. We need to add Chinese in there.
Chinese? How about Japanese? And how about Cree and Ojibwe are different ones?
Yeah. So English and French are no longer the official languages. How about that? We make that change.
Oh, no, I like French. The equal status of English and French. And this was very important that people have to understand that this is a charter right that we're going to be talking about as we go along, about how English and French have the same status in all provinces everywhere in Canada. It's not just in Quebec, as some people think. Right? We have the same status everywhere. And in Quebec, English should have the same status as French, although a lot of French Quebecers might disagree with that.
Yeah. Interesting that English and French are the official languages of New Brunswick and have equality of status and equal rights and privileges as to their use in all institutions of the legislature and government of New Brunswick.
Yep, exactly, because New Brunswick is actually very bilingual. I
Mm.
used to receive a French newsletter from them, and very good. And people wrote, and people would write articles in French and that, and send them around. And they're very was actually pretty good. And then there's also minority language educational rights for people who they have a right to learn the minority language. So if everybody around you is French, you have the right to learn English and have English streaming. Same as if
Oh,
everybody speaks English, you have the right to have French language speaking.
yeah, but when I was driving down the road in Quebec, well, I missed the last exit sign in Ontario. Never saw another exit sign again. I was confused. I went round and round in circles in Quebec.
Oh, that must have been fun.
Couldn't find an exit sign anywhere.
Mhm.
Oh, damn. I wasn't looking. I shouldn't have been looking for an exit sign. It's Saute, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's also Aboriginal rights, the rights to consultation, the rights to the treaty rights, multicultural heritage, the rights for both genders, um, certain schools to be preserved as having certain rights, mostly of denominational and Catholic Church, which I
Yeah,
think would be taken out.
you
But
may not know the answer to this one, but under Section 16, there seems to be a lot of use of additional bits of law in here that relate to New Brunswick. Why? I know they were the last. They were the last province to get provincehood.
yeah,
Well, apart from none of it,
yeah,
they were the last province.
yeah. Well, this was put into the official languages of Canada, equal rights official languages in New Brunswick. Maybe
Mm.
there was at some point when New Brunswick joined that this was something that was put in. Hey, these are always thought of, after people talk about things and then they get added in. And then they also have the interesting thing about this is, and then they also have rights of Aboriginal people, where there's various things for it equalized. Then there's equalization of regional disparities, where each province has the right to have the same kind of quality of services, blah blah blah. So we're all treated equal. And they have an amending formula, which is in the charter. So if you want to go out and amend the charter, they have to go through proper steps. Um, there's just a lot of different things. And they have, when you're dealing with that, then there's section 15 of the charter, which is the equality rights, where people who, um, disabilities, gender, uh, different language, ethnic groups, different things for equality rights. So you really have to people would have to really get the idea for how equality rights. So basically, equality rights is every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination. and in particular without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability.
Yeah,
Over
15.1.
over time, things get written in, like sexual identity and other types of things get written into the charter. So these things have actually been. This is also what we call this has a supremacy over provincial legislation, and it
Yeah.
even has supremacy over provincial human rights codes. For example, in
Interesting.
Quebec, like in Alberta, one time there was a case under the Individual Rights Act in Alberta. There was a person claiming discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. And under the Individual Rights Act at the time, it did not have a provision for that. So the courts wrote it in that it's called the Vriend case, Vriend, and that was actually written into that
Mm.
Individual
But at
Rights
the end
Act.
of the day, the equality rights in 15.1, apart from being core parts of our, our rights within everything we do, won't necessarily get added to include these other categories, will they? They're
No, but they
adjudicated.
get decided by courts and they
Yeah,
get added in over time. Because as I
yeah,
said, there's nothing in there that says sexual identity or gender
yeah,
identity, although it's
and-
covered,
yeah.
right? Because there
And
has
that's one of
been,
these things where courts and tribunals interpret charter rights.
yeah, and the courts and tribunals have to adhere to the charter too. Okay, they're also subject to charter decisions as well as common law decisions, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
So the interesting aspect about the charter is there's always a lot of critics about the charter. You'll always find people who says, "Oh, I don't like the charter because they're protecting people, but they're not protecting me. I'm a white male, Anglo-Saxon male, and I don't get any protection." Everybody gets protection. Everybody.
Yeah, but again, I can see here as a white male here, and age potentially,
Yeah,
age discrimination could
yeah,
apply.
yeah.
Sex discrimination could certainly apply if men are kept out of it. Religion could apply because and I may or may not be a part of a religious group. There's also
Paganism is still a creed.
yeah, creed is another issue here
Yeah,
because creed comes into play, and creed almost envelops groups, doesn't it? Almost groups of like people.
yeah.
For example, left-handed goaltenders in hockey,
Hmm.
right? And that might be a creed,
Yeah, who
right?
knows?
Might,
Veganism was considered a creed under our human rights code.
yeah,
These
exactly.
things are
Those
very
types of things.
situational too. Hey, like when we were talking, like as you notice, when I bring people into the office, the most common person that I represent in the human rights code are white males.
Yep.
Right?
Oh yeah.
And it's not because they're white males. Well, one of them, a couple of them were, but most of the stuff that we have is that white males have just as much what we call intersectional issues
Well,
that would be involved where they are suffering many forms of discrimination.
yeah, and with some of the first cases that were taken up under Sex Discrimination Act were actually taken by white males.
Yeah, exactly. And
Right?
this is where it says, like, you cannot be discriminated against on the basis of sex.
Yeah,
Okay? Which means it could be because you're male or because you're female,
yeah.
or in between somewhere. Who knows? Okay?
And actually, racial groups is important. Racial, national, ethnic origin groups are all matter there, right?
Yep. It's a protection for your groups. Like if you belong to a particular group and then there's some kind of law or program or something delivered by the government. Remember, the Charter of Rights only applies to the government or government authorized facilities.
Yeah.
It does not apply to,
But
let's
again,
say, if I'm an employer, that's the Human Rights Code.
yeah, I was going to say again. Now you've got human rights codes that exist within individual provinces. Like I know Alberta's got one, Ontario's got one. They've all got one.
Yeah. So let's go and talk about different things when there's some exceptions to the charter or some attention.
Yeah. So if a new law is being considered, can the federal government check whether it's actually compliant with the charter?
Yeah, they could. They don't have to, but they could. And what they do is they instigate a reference case, and they bring that to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would investigate the law and determine whether this is a charter compliant legislation. Because I don't know how many reference cases are actually submitted, but there are a few that have been in the past where they just want to
Well,
make sure. And the purpose of doing that, Peter, is that we want to make sure that if they're passing a law, that they don't want to have 1,500 charter cases filed against the federal government.
yeah, I was going to say, biggest challenge with passing a new law is that you can, how long does it take to actually put a federal, a reference case? 6 months, put the lawyers up, argue the case is 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you pass the law and the law gets enacted and it's interpreted it's first applied and interpreted in British Columbia, and then it's applied and interpreted in Quebec, and then it's applied and interpreted in New Brunswick. And then, hey presto, somebody in Toronto wants to apply that law, but they like the decision in BC, they hate the decision in Quebec, but they're ambivalent about the decision in New Brunswick. So kind of now you've kind of got to go, I need to challenge that law, especially if the judge decides against me.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So this is where it's really important. Sometimes it will do that just to make sure your legislation is not going to be subject or vulnerable to a charter challenge. Okay. I don't know too many times about how they've done it, but I know they've done it a few times.
Yeah.
Because sometimes things are controversial and they feel they have to change it.
Is such cases held in public?
You can get them. You can get them, okay? Because sometimes they are referred to as reference cases, and but I'm not sure exactly what it would be under.
I presume
these are things that are done through the Supreme Court. It's like I'm going to the Supreme Court and I'm consulting with them on it, and then I write it and I make a presentation about why I want that new law in place, and this is the wording of the law.
Yeah, but okay, so you're creating, and I'm just doing this for for fun's sake. I'm creating a new interprovincial transit act, a federal transit act, right? It is to remove certain things that exist on today's thing and make sure that truckers can get the same get the same gas price whether they're traveling in BC or New Brunswick, right? And one amongst many other things. So you want to put this up against you do a federal challenge, you do a reference case for it. But of course, what happens is the court comes down and says, yeah, Section 1 has a problem here, Section 2 has a problem here, Section 5 and 6 really should be amended to include X and Y and Z and A and B and C. So now sections 5 and 6 become sections 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 of the new Act. So now we've built out a brand new Act. That reference case has no longer any reference to the original, to the actual Act that's passed, because they've complied with the what the Supreme Court has said, and the brief of the Supreme Court, which is to update and amend that we believe that you could have constitutional challenges in these parts.
I know that there was something around the abortion law at one time, a long time ago, but when they tried to put that up, but then Henry Morgentaler at that time, who see, at one time, if a woman wanted to have an abortion, she would have to visit a therapeutic abortion advisory committee, which would be in the hospital. There would be 3 doctors that would review her request to have an abortion, and they can decide yay or nay for whatever reason. And this, and people have declared that it was not making abortion accessible for women, and it could be hard because some hospitals didn't have a therapeutic abortion committee. So Henry Morgenthaler, he just set up abortion clinics. So anybody who wanted an abortion could just go to a clinic and have it done. So he was charged multiple times, and then he just challenged it when he was being charged. He just
Well,
said no. He said this should be a choice of the woman, and this was life, liberty, security,
yeah,
and they just scrapped the whole law altogether.
yeah. I
Canada
was going to say
today without any abortion law.
that's what it says here. Abortion in Canada is legal throughout pregnancy and is publicly funded as a medical procedure. There is no law that criminalizes or restricts abortion in Canada. The Supreme Court struck down the law as unconstitutional in '88, making abortion legal in any stage of pregnancy. There is no laws barring women from having abortion. It's not considered a constitutionally protected right under the Charter, though.
Yeah, it's not a right,
Yeah,
but it is something that's not illegal.
yeah.
Okay, so some of the problems that we
And
have in
there's,
Canada is
yeah,
still abortion access, but it's more about coverage or
yeah,
where
yeah.
you can get abortion services. Because in
And of
some
course,
provinces there may be some access issues.
and of course, some doctors and medical opinions are of mindful that one should not have abortions after n number of weeks. I don't
Yeah,
remember exactly how
yeah,
many weeks that is.
generally. Yeah.
I think, and those considerations are put into place, I presume around this,
Yeah.
right?
So this
Um,
kind of protects
yeah, and so
like
that's
that
a
is
prime
put in place
example. That's a prime example of
of
the
challenge.
Supreme Court striking down a law as
Yeah.
unconstitutional,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, they were struck it down. Another one was the Lord's Day Act, which was trying to think of the fellow. He ran a
That's
pro.
Sunday trading, right?
Yeah, yeah, and then he just challenged that. Oh, yeah, Paul Magda. Paul Magda. Yeah, he charged it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it got struck down because the Lord's Day Act implied that this was a day of rest for religious observance, and stores and shops would not be able to keep business or shouldn't be. And they struck that down, saying that he was allowed to be able to carry on business on Sundays.
Yeah,
So
and
this was a very
that's
important decision.
that's under the case of RV Big M Drug Mart at the
Yeah,
Supreme Court
that's another
decided that
that's another
the
one too. They could criminally charge before, and now they don't.
yeah,
Now they replaced it with something called the Retail Business Holidays Act, which gives people the option of not working Sundays in a store, but it doesn't
yeah,
force a store to stay closed on Sundays.
yeah,
Okay, but I can
and
go to my employer and say, look, I observe Sundays. So these things are very important about
yeah,
how that the charter is in place to protect people's rights.
yeah.
The next thing I want to
Okay,
talk about
all
is
right. So
Section 33, which is a big.
I was just going to go there.
Okay. Okay. This means that a law shall operate outstanding a provision included in Section 2 or Section 7 to 15 of this charter. And it has a sunset clause after 5 years, so you have to renew it or don't. So basically, this allows the government to pass some legislation and allows the court not to look at it under the charter.
Yeah. For example, Bill 101 and 21 in Quebec.
Yeah. Bill 101 is a language law where Quebec would put signs up in big letters for French, everything in French, and under little tiny letters in English. And
Yeah, that's
other
why.
types of things were French dominant, right?
That's why I couldn't find. That's why I couldn't find the exit sign in Quebec.
Yeah, they wanted him to
Because
go around in circles.
it was this small, right?
Yep. Yep.
Whereas
It's
it said
probably that
saute
small,
this
and the
big,
French was
right?
there, and he didn't understand what they were saying. Yeah. And
No, I
Bill
know what saute.
And
I was
one
looking.
is the law where about if you're receiving or giving public services, not allowed to wear religious artifacts, which
Yeah,
I personally have issues with that because if
I've
you're
got a.
somebody who who supports or really has a faith in a particular religion, you carry your rosary, or you want to wear a cross, or if you're a woman who wants to wear a hijab, you know, what I've had women wear a hijab and they've worked here and
Mm,
they've worked with other people here. Like I've never had an issue with any of that. That's a person's right. It's part of their own religious freedoms that they want to preserve and promote, and it's part of our cultural community where you want to preserve and promote part of your culture as well in
yeah.
Canada. And what you wear to work sometimes could be part of that. But in Quebec, they did Section 33, and that's what they
Well,
did.
it's interesting. I've never had any issue with anybody what they wear religious wise. I do have a big problem though with things like hijab, because I've seen countries whereby women are definitely mistreated.
Yeah, in those countries, they might be. Like in Canada, if they're doing it, I mean, that's their choice. I mean, if they start
Yeah,
not wanting to, they shouldn't be punished either.
yeah,
Like if like I've seen people where they refused to wear the hijab and then they got punished for it by their family, and
yeah.
they shouldn't either. So it's something that I believe is an individual's choice. Another section which was quite controversial back in I think it was '97, and this is the Lana Muir case. The Lana Muir case in Alberta. At one time in Canada, there was something called the eugenics board, basically out west, and it was in Ontario for a while, but both mostly out west, up until about the late '70s or something. They were sterilizing people who were deemed to be mentally handicapped,
Lailani,
like
Lailani,
yeah.
yeah,
And
Lailani.
sometimes they've even sterilized people who are Aboriginal or Indigenous. So there's a lot of people who were sterilized against their will. Like they'd be told that they're going for an epidemi, and at the end of the day, they found out that they were sterilized against their will. So they wanted to prevent them from having babies, I guess. And it was a way of trying to protect the institutional environment or whatever that they had. So eugenics board was sued, okay, by many people in Alberta. Okay, this is just the case in Alberta with Annie Mura. She
Mm,
sued and they got awarded a lot of money. Okay? It was millions, billions, okay? A lot of money that was given down. So the government at that time, in 1997, when they got that ruling, they said, okay, fine. We were guilty. We shouldn't have had this eugenics board. We want to compensate people. But they passed legislation trying to limit the amount of money that survivors of that board could be awarded. Instead of being awarded by a court, they decided that the legislator is going to decide.
yeah,
So there was a lot of blowback. I was part of the blowback back in '97. There was a lot, every organization that dealt with people with disabilities, some legal organizations, mental health organizations, everybody jumped on the bandwagon and blew it back until they decided to rescind their Section 33 application. Okay? It's a risk. It's a risk that governments take because politically they paid the price. They said they can't be doing that. Okay?
yeah. And another one that's upcoming is this demand at the moment in Ontario for clearing homeless encampments, and the question about people's Section 7 freedoms.
Yeah, like there was a decision in Kitchener-Waterloo where there were homeless encampments, and the court said nope, you can't be clearing the homeless encampments unless you had some place for these people to go.
Yeah,
Okay? The shelters are full. Okay? They had no place to go, so where are they going to go? So you can clean this encampment, and all that's going to happen is the encampment will move somewhere else. Okay? So you're playing whack-a-mole with this, literally. Okay, so the court said, no, you can't be doing this. You can't be doing this because this is abusive of people's rights and freedoms. Because not only are they just getting the people out of the encampments, they're also destroying these people's possessions.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all they have is on those encampments. So this is
Yeah.
where a lot of people were getting very controversial. So then it happened a few other places where the courts were not allowing this. So
Well,
suddenly, mayors of Ontario, there's several mayors, I think about
yeah.
13 mayors, they decided the
Actually,
right
it's
to.
more than that. It's about 100 meters. Some are getting on for 100 meters now.
No, no, no,
Um,
no, no, it's not. Actually, there's less mayors demanding that because people are putting pressure on their city councils. Right? But
oh,
there were 13 at the beginning, wanted to write to letter to Doug Ford saying, we want to have the tools under Section 33, if necessary, to be able to clear these camps if we need be. So, in other words, it doesn't matter if the shelters are full. We want to be able to clear the camps regardless, which to me doesn't make any sense. Unless you're going to give them another place to live, give
well,
them shelter or something.
at the moment, no such bill exists in Ontario. No
It
such
doesn't
act
exist, but
exists.
they're going to be. They had it before the election. They had the bill before
They
the
were
election.
talking about it. There was a bill
Yeah, yeah, but
before the
now it's going to
government.
be put back before the legislature.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's something that I think people who are particularly interested in this topic should look into. It's a very, very controversial bill, and to me, it's saying, okay, people who are of a social status of a certain type are not entitled to rights under the charter, while
Yeah.
everybody else who is lucky enough not to be put into that situation does have rights. Okay, so
And,
it's
and
a
the worst
comparison
about
where
that,
you're looking at what are the interests of people, say, who want to use these parks and the interests of the people who are in the homeless. Like, I don't want to say denying people the use of the park. My aim is more or less, why don't we give people who are homeless a place to go? Why are we not creating housing? Why
yeah,
are we not helping them find places to live? And
that's
for
about
those that
where I
need,
look at it.
give them the help they need. I mean,
That's
this is the kind of thing that it's very controversial.
Yeah, it's about where I look at it as
Yeah.
well. Is that in certain parts of Europe, they have developed this almost quasi constitutional thing called housing first.
Yeah.
I actually wonder why we don't do the same thing here.
You don't, because in Canada and the US and states like that, even the UK, housing, food, basic expenses and living costs are not a right. You
Mm,
don't have a right to live. You don't have a right to have an income to survive. And I don't know, like I don't know how to sort that out, because I don't think the courts should be setting our social policy either. But it should be done by the legislature and the parliament, but it has to be done in a way that's fair to
yeah,
people so
yeah,
that we're not looking at people who are conservative who just are interested in cutting budgets.
yeah,
We have to have a way to make sure people have that right to turn to and can claim that right if they need to. Housing First is a very, very good model and it's been exercised in many places. And Finland, Vienna, other places in Europe, actually, even in the United States and Utah, in the state of Utah, which is not exactly a liberal left state. If anybody's been there or knows
well,
people there, it's
yeah,
very interesting because they have a right to have a place to live. And
and
the
and
people who
actually,
most appear needy, the ones who are so called drug addicted, who have mental health problems, who have been homeless for a while, they fare the best
yeah,
because they give them unconditionally. We're giving you a place to live. They don't even tell them they have to do this, this, and that before they can get in. But once they're housed, most of them start stabilizing. They start knowing what they want, setting goals for themselves. Some of them will take help that's out there. Some of them don't need it.
yeah,
It depends on the type of person and what's there. And we found this to be very effective, about 85% success rate in different places. And then for others, it takes a little longer to work with them, but eventually they all could get help. But rather than pulling Section 33s on all the homeless here in Ontario, they should be looking at that. And that should be a priority.
yeah. All right. Moving on to another section, section one. The reasonable limits as prescribed by law is a something that applies to the whole of the Canadian Charter. I
Yep.
had particular problems about this when it came to the UK Human Rights Act, because UK Human Rights Act supports the freedom of speech, but doesn't but also puts in place reasonable limits as prescribed by law. And for example, one of the thoughts that I always have is, in the time of war, you need the freedom of anti-war people to be able to, oppose war.
Hmm.
Right?
Eugene
It's a
Debs,
fundamental right, in my view.
Eugene Debs in the States, he was considered
Yeah,
a communist, and he
yeah,
was against the war in the United States during World War One, and he was jailed.
yeah. And he should not have been.
Yeah. So these things, like,
Whether he was, and frankly, I don't care whether he's a communist or whatever.
yeah,
It
I
doesn't
don't
matter.
care. I
Right?
mean, he was
It's
speaking
his,
against war. He's a
yeah,
citizen.
that's his right to choose, right?
Yeah.
Whether he's
Like
what.
people, and also a right to avoid conscription too. I think people have a right to refuse that,
I
because that's something too.
yeah, yeah,
That people have that inherent right. If I don't want to fight in a war, I have that right to choose not to. But if I want to fight in a war, I have a right to choose to.
yeah.
So these are things where people should have rights in that. And I think when we discuss these things, rights are a lot more complicated than people think.
Oh
So
yeah,
when we talk about reasonable limits as prescribed by law, this is actually in our Charter of Rights, where at the beginning they say that some things the public interest, we can violate people's charter rights when it's in the public interest to do so. And that when weighed, like charter rights and public interest, that public interest outweighs it. For example, during the pandemic, there are many things where the provinces were entitled to set restrictions on people, gathering limits, people being inside buildings, being different things at the time, and for certain occupations, provincially again, they would have to take vaccines.
mm,
Not everybody was mandated to take vaccines.
yeah.
Some employers decided to tell their people to mandate vaccines, but there were so many ways of avoiding that. But when people were told that this was because there was a pandemic, it was not because we just want to force everybody to do what we tell them to do. No, because as soon as
In fact,
when things were safer for people to go back, that was lifted.
actually, not everybody had to take vaccines.
Yeah, nobody. Like I did require it in our office because we do meet people who might be vulnerable, and we had people come in and talk to us sometimes. And then we also had the vaccine shield, we had the mask, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so our staff or any associates had to take vaccines. I don't know whether anybody who came into the office had a vaccine or not. That was their business. I mean, but I did require them to wear a mask and require them to sign some forms, particularly about did they travel in the last 2 weeks and are they experiencing symptoms, that sort of thing. So things like that was what we had to do that. And we had no COVID outbreaks in our office. We were fortunate, either through our clients or through our people that work here. So we did that, but I only did this as long as I needed to do so. Because as soon as things came to a point where whatever was left of COVID was pretty safe to live with, where it was almost like the flu.
Yeah, Omicron 697 or whatever the variant was, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, that's what I kept talking. Like, we were going like all through 22 letters of the Greek alphabet, and that was going on. I remember I've made a lot of remarks about that. Some of them was a little heavy-handed, like when they're closing small businesses, which I objected to. And then when you go to Walmart, they allowed everybody to go to Walmart. And then when small businesses were affected, then they said, okay, we're going to tie down all the stuff that's not necessary. And you can't
masks.
including masks, right, Peter?
Yeah. You couldn't buy a mask even though you could see it. Hey, I want a mask.
Yeah.
But again, if you
I went under the ropes that they had there. I bought some books or something. Then I went up to the front and paid for them, and I was fine. And
Yeah.
then it left. So it's just like, to me, I found that whole thing very
Yeah.
nonsensical.
Absolutely
But
nonsense, but
it's
still.
been challenged. People have challenged the things about the indoor gathering limits and things, and that was actually ruled to be proper
Well,
under public
we were
order.
just yeah. So we were getting to that. So new laws and actions of government can all be challenged, right?
Yeah, like some aspects of the Emergency Act when that was put against the convoy. Not all aspects were ruled against, but some aspects were ruled against. And again, that's put under review by the Crown.
Yeah.
So this is a very, very complicated thing when people do it. People should read these decisions and understand what these decisions say. So in the future, if they want to challenge a law, they need to look at the other decisions that were made by the courts, and they can decide whether their issue falls within that decision. Okay?
Yep.
There are people who have protested outdoors, okay, where they're probably not
Well, there was
creating risk for others.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean that was perhaps a violation by charging them for protesting outdoors, because
And
outdoors
that
was
was
not a high risk.
yeah. There were a couple of Niagara cases on that one,
Yeah.
right? That were about these outdoor protests, and to be
Mhm.
quite honest, they were. I think to arrest the people was actually
The
balmy.
same person. It's
Yeah.
the same person who led them. And the
You don't support him. It's
yeah,
just all there is
people can
to it.
stand 100 feet behind, or they can stand 20 feet. It's
Yeah.
not like you're restricted by a building or something.
Yeah.
So
Well, you
it's a
see,
very, yeah.
yeah. You see, during COVID, when I was outside, I never wore a mask. There's nothing in the planet that's going to convince me to wear a mask outside.
Yeah, exactly. I never wore a mask outside, but if I had to go indoors during COVID, I put a mask on. I always
Yeah.
carried them with me.
Yeah.
And then going into Walmart or whatever, it was just funny, like during that time, there's a lot of horrible things. I mean, every government made mistakes, no matter who they were,
Oh,
where
that's
where
true.
you were, and what country you were in, what province you were in, doesn't matter. They all acted in a certain way because they wanted to act in the public interest.
Yeah.
And and
Even,
it's very
even,
difficult when you're trying to mix the public interest with people's rights.
yeah, even our friend Donald Trump, his bleach law was in the public interest, wasn't it?
His what law?
Bleach law.
Oh, to inject bleach.
Yeah, to inject bleach.
Oh, yeah, that's when he told everybody. Well, ivermectin too. He's promoting ivermectin. Nobody ever heard about it before until he came up with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now everybody suddenly started buying ivermectin. So whatever company makes that, he must have shares in it or something.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So,
So that is one very important part of the charter, because there's a lot of things that happen within these things, but they're mostly taken on a social or a public basis when things are done. So the pandemic is really a good example of when that was applied in many instances.
okay. So if we take a charter challenge, which we all have the right to do from every once in a while, does it actually change the law?
Yes, it does. Like as I said, Henry Morgenthaler changed it to get rid of the therapeutic abortion committees, which was restricting a lot of
Another
women from getting abortion rights.
and another one was the prostitution laws were
Yeah,
declared
yeah.
unconstitutional.
Although I still think the new law that it got changed into is also unconstitutional, because it's also putting the prostitution underground, just creating a lot of risks. Okay, so making it illegal to buy sex. It's not illegal to sell sex, but illegal to buy sex, which is putting it
That's
underground.
ridiculous, isn't it? Because
Yeah,
if
exactly.
you can buy, if you can sell, you can buy.
Yep, exactly.
Um,
And a
and
person should be able to set themselves up and say, I want to run this type of business,
yeah,
and not have to go through the pimps.
yeah,
Okay? They should be able to just say, okay, I want to do this and put myself out as a high class escort.
yeah. And again, I think the whole question about the prostitution laws is kind of flawed in a way, because you now get the Johns, not the you know.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the oldest occupation. Are you going to be eliminating the oldest occupation by putting a law on it? No,
Yeah.
no.
And how
I'd
many
rather make it
divorces?
safe. Okay, so
How many?
women don't need their pimps,
Yeah.
and
How
that they
many?
can hire their own people to help them.
Yeah. And
Okay?
how
They
many
can hire
divorces
an
did that
advertising
cause?
company for them, hire somebody at their door to take reception and to
Yeah.
monitor the
Yeah.
customers. You know,
Yeah.
they can do that without saying that somebody's benefiting off the avails, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how many, how many divorces did that cause by making men responsible, or the customers responsible?
Yeah. Like Terry Bedford took that. That's the Bedford case.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bedford ran a dominatrix house, and she went up and she got that. And good for her. If that's how she made money, that's how she made money.
Yeah.
We talk about
Canada.
free enterprise a lot in Canada, and but then we look down on people who do that kind of stuff, and I don't think we should.
Yeah. And
As
this
long
is
as it's
Canada.
that person's own ambition, and it's not being forced on them or not being
Yeah.
trafficked into this thing.
And this is a case of Canada, the Attorney General of Canada versus Bedford.
Yes, the Bedford case, I call it. And I was asked to speak at a presentation for the Humanist Society on Niagara,
Mm.
and I spoke about the issues that the new law creates. So these are things that I see all the time. Yes, and I think women who are on the street, they need the support to get out of it, right? Because a lot of them are being trafficked, and a lot of them are forced to feed their addictions by
Yeah.
doing this. So they need to
What
be.
you were talking, and what you're talking about is that both sides of the equation, you've got consenting adults.
Yes, exactly. Consenting adults and the individual who's selling,
And
they
and
have to be doing this on their own volition.
yeah. And the fact that a man or a woman or anybody,
Yeah,
is buying sex off another person is, immaterial
yeah.
to
A
the rest
general
of it.
thing,
Yeah.
but yeah, that comes out once in a while. Hey, that sort of thing. This is the
Yeah.
type of thing that people go out and they go and see people or whatever, and people do this all the time. And
So
it's not going to stop just because you make it illegal.
yeah. And essentially, yeah. So we've covered several cases there whereby there's been a charter challenge and it changed the law.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then other areas where they've done things is some of the criminal code laws too, where it's been challenged. Like sometimes the government has said, well, people should be able to serve consecutive sentences when they do multiple murders, or they have a weapons charge. They have to serve a minimum sentence of 10 years, for example. That's very arbitrary. I think the
Mm.
courts have full discretion on these things.
I would also say one of the things that I'm always mindful of, and I've always, ever since the UK had the Human Rights Act, I've always said one of the things that I believe in is that when it comes to criminal code, the criminal code shouldn't be more than 50 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there's a lot of stuff that's been in the criminal code that should
Yeah,
be just
like
moved out,
like
or
the
people weren't
buggery.
even aware of that's in the criminal code.
Yeah,
Okay. Like we were talking earlier about some of the cases of criminal code that's actually wasn't there like not too long ago.
yeah,
Okay. People have done these things, but they're not aware of it. Okay?
yeah,
But are criminal offenses at one
yeah,
time.
yeah, exactly. Like for example, buggery.
Yeah, buggery is one.
Yeah,
And 1969, they changed everything to do with that because they said the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation,
yeah.
which I agree with.
That's the irony about that. The state has no right to be in the bedrooms of the nation. Yeah,
Yeah, which I agree with.
yeah,
Hey, 'cause this is a thing that because otherwise, if you start putting rules on all of these things and laws of criminal codes on all these things, it's not just illegalizing it. You're also putting people who are participants into unsafe situations,
yeah.
and that's why it's not good to have them.
And ironically, that works for prostitution as well as for the
Yeah,
other ones as
exactly,
well, right?
exactly. But
Yeah.
we're always going to wrestle with that because people are always saying, "Oh, what do we do about this?" Messes up the street, causes
Well,
traffic problems, causes this and that.
mm,
Okay. And drugs, drugs is a very complicated thing. Okay?
yeah,
And I think it's worth a study that needs to be studied, okay, where drugs have to be more of a medical issue as opposed to a criminal issue.
yeah. Well, the other question is, okay, so there are any other charter challenges like that where it changed the law?
Well, there was where there's two positive changes. Like the charter tends to say, okay, get the government out of my back, get them off my back. Okay. They tend to have what they call negative rights. Okay. So you go to court and government's not going to intervene, or perhaps the criminal code has to change, or they drop that law, they don't enforce it. And there's only two instances that I know, okay, that were one of them involves a woman who was deaf, and she was in a delivery, and she had some complications, and she had some issues, and there were a lot of issues as a result of not understanding what was going on with her and how to respond. So she took this to court, and at the end of the day, this changed the law where the government has to provide care. So if there's a government program that you're dealing with, like your health care, for example, and you have a disability, there's a positive obligation on the person who serves you to accommodate your needs and to accommodate, like say, a deaf person or blind person, that sort of thing, so that that
Yeah,
person has an equal opportunity. The other one, which is very interesting, which is Chwali, which comes out of Quebec, where a gentleman had was getting fed up with waiting for, I think it was hip surgery or something, and he was in a lot of pain, and it was taking him forever to get visits with specialists, surgeons, and so forth in Quebec. So he took the government to court, literally, and said that I should be allowed to just go and get private care or some other care in the US or whatever, so I can get my problem dealt with. So basically, that was a warning put on to the government at that time, because the government needs to be given to reasonable wait times.
yeah,
So this guy, he says that if somebody is forced into a situation where they have to wait too long and it becomes unbearable in terms of pain or whatever,
yeah,
that they should be able to have that out. Right? So it gave them that out that would do this, but it also gave a message to the federal government where they started doing the wait time challenge in the provinces, and they appointed people who would be wait time czars to try to reduce wait times for different procedures,
yeah,
particularly those that are not emergencies.
yeah.
And in the province, like your hip
Well,
replacements, your knee
yeah.
replacements, your
It
corneal
depends who.
implant.
It depends. A lot of that depends on which perspective you take as to whether it's an emergency or not.
Yeah,
You're
so this
suffering.
is
You're
why they,
suffering
yeah,
pain.
yeah,
That's a frigging emergency,
yeah,
right?
like this guy
To
was
you and me,
suffering.
it might
He
not
was
be.
identifying himself as suffering. Okay,
Yeah,
so this is one of the things I did this, and this is why when you're talking about charter, it's always government stuff. Like
yeah,
it's both of these involved healthcare. Right?
yeah,
So there's other cases in healthcare too. There was the day case, which was out in Cambrai. I forget what the name of the surgical clinic, because that's the
yeah,
actual name of the case. He was the one who tried to put private healthcare in the system, but that was lost by him because you can't be putting that and saying that, yes, I have a right to do private healthcare, because there is no right to do that, because Canada has a Canada Health Act, which is a right in Canada. So
yeah,
very unusual when you kind of look at that, because health laws is interesting,
yeah.
right? And
All
I
right.
was reading some of the policy papers
Yeah,
that was flowing into this case, which is just fascinating, because the thing is, the responsibility of the government is say, let's make sure that there's not excessive wait times for cases that are not that are elective. We call them
yeah,
elective.
yeah,
Okay. Like, we're very good in an emergency. If you're having a heart attack right here, they'll take care of you right away. Okay? Or other things like that, they'll take care of you right away. But it's the elective stuff that seem to be a problem in these cases.
Yeah. And that's actually part of what a lot of people complain about
Yeah.
with our healthcare
And
system.
let's just work on it. Let's figure out how we can make that better for people. Right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we're on the way to doing that. Sometimes I think we're on a way away from that. So it depends on who's doing it.
And you know what? To be quite honest, it probably depends upon where you need the treatment.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. What
possibly,
kind of treatment?
yeah,
Yeah, like you went to a clinic where they've done, like, say, a dozen eye surgeries,
yeah, oh
right?
yeah,
Within the next like in the afternoon, you know, and it's still fielded by OHIP. That's fine, right? But you got specialists there. That's all they do.
that's exactly what So that happened to me.
Yeah,
You
exactly. That's
know
why I
that happened
referred
to
to
me.
the
It
eye
was
surgery.
OHIP funded,
Yeah,
uh,
that's why I
and
referred to the eye
it
surgery.
was it was a great way of making sure that we got it. Now,
The
you know,
shoulders clinic, which is does hernias, the
yeah.
same way. So if you got a hernia, you get there to the shoulders clinic, and they'll take care of you, and that's OHIP as
But
well.
there must be differences on regions because, for example, Niagara region where we are has a vile reputation for low wait times and poor quality service. Yet you go to other areas and and everybody kind of says, "Wow, our system is fantastic."
Exactly. You have to look at things like there's a shortage of nurses, there's a shortage
Yeah,
of primary care practitioners, different things. These are more political things that have to be addressed. Okay,
yeah,
if you're going to make sure that we're in compliance with Chihuahua, for example,
yeah.
okay, and
And
that people still have public health care.
just to remind everybody, we've been kind of taking a small, little kind of peruse through the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and a few things around that. Okay.
Yeah, so if you have any questions about this, just give us a call.
Give any lawyer, give any paralegal a call, because
Even though you'd like to come here, I'd like you to come here. But however,
yeah. And as I said, if you need to contact us, you can do so at 905-688-5598. Or you can email Angela at angela@weareinvictus.legal or me at peter@weareinvictus.legal. Or go to our website. And again,
what you hear today on Spin Legal, whether it's in this show or any other shows that we've done, it is not legal advice. We are not giving you legal advice. So don't go run around to somebody and say, I heard on Spin Legal that you're not allowed to do this. I'm sorry, I'm not giving you any legal advice. Okay? We have to put this disclaimer in. But if
yeah,
you do want to get some legal advice, do speak to a lawyer, do speak to us, do speak to a paralegal, but do not just go running on your own based on what you hear on this show or even that you look at Dr.
and,
Google. Right? Same
and
as
we're not,
surgery on yourself by looking up on Google.
and we're not part of Facebook University.
Yeah, Facebook University. No, no, no. Even though you can hear from us on Facebook, but this is an information series. It's not a legal advice series.
Yeah. So thank you for being here and have a great week, everybody.
Yep.
Anything else, Angela?
Nope. This is pretty good.
All right. Bye.
Bye now.